Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina Vung, and I am the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Data Readiness, which will be presented by Sam Hedberry from Info Exchange. So we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any questions during the session, please type it in the questions box on your webinar panel, and Sam will answer them at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you have any technical issues, please also type it in the questions box and I'll try my best to help you out with that. Please note that if you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible today. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you all within a week after the webinar ends. You will then be able to access it at any given time. So that's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Sam.
Hi, thanks so much for the introduction, Tanya. That's super cool of you to introduce what's going to be, I hope, a really great webinar. And I want to thank all the people who are joining us today to talk about data readiness. It's got a really long title, actually. I was just thinking about that when I was reading it. Data readiness: exploring your organizational environment to lay the foundation to use your data effectively. It's quite long, isn't it? But really, I think that's that last piece that really sticks out to me. One of the reasons we're here is just to be able to lay those foundations to use your data effectively. But before we get into that, maybe I'll just introduce a little bit about who I am. What's going on here? My little slide deck is not moving. Oh, now it is. Hey, there I am. So I'm that guy in the right-hand corner there, and I'm a senior consultant at Info Exchange. For those who don't know who Info Exchange are or have had little exposure to our work, we're an organisation that believes in technology for social justice. And what that means is we provide a range of services to the NFP space to help them use technology to boost outcomes for people who are experiencing or at risk of some sort of disadvantage in the community. We've been doing it for about 30 years. We have the largest client relationship management software in the country. We've also got the team that I work in, a IT support team, and we provide a range of consultancy services down here. We also do, and probably the most important element of our work is in the digital literacy space. So we partner with a lot of corporates, Google and Microsoft and a few others, and we hold a lot of community-based programs that help people, like I said, get out of some sort of disadvantages with a core focus on technology. One of the really cool programs that we have here, and we've got plenty, is the Youth IT program, where we hold an education and training based program, which we get young people in, and we help them get a certificate 3 in IT, and then we actually place them in one of our partner networks. So they've got qualifications and a job, and that education and training piece, as we all know, is so integral to avoiding some of the pitfalls of the disadvantage that many people experience in society. And a little bit of me, why I'm here: I'm an old not-for-profit guy. I've been around for about 12 years. I started off in the alcohol and other drug game, and that was amazing. Before working with homeless youth at Melbourne City Mission, I was a residential youth worker, and then I moved on to coordinating programs to help young people get out of avoid the pitfalls of public and social housing, and help them get into private rental, before working in social housing for about 5 to 6 years in program development and doing a lot of stakeholder engagement. But the one thing that's really the one thing that has been a constant in my career is a love of data. I remember being at Family Access Network in Box Hill when I was managing the private rental brokerage program as a part of the Creating Connections initiative. And we had to report to the department on our funding every month and every quarter, as I'm sure many of you guys do. And I remember how much I loved playing around with pivot tables in Excel and being able to tell the story of the great work that we were doing with young people in the eastern region of Melbourne. And I also loved being able to share those stories within our organisation as well. So, I could say to the other youth workers that I was working with, hey man, like we did some great stuff, check this out. And I'd show them a graph. And that graph would say, we've worked with 50 young people. Of those 50 young people, 30 of them got a property. Of those 30, 25 had a living and life skills component. Of those 25, like it was really terrific to be able to kind of show empirically what it was we were doing. I just loved it. I loved it. So I went off and did a social science degree in statistics and then my MBA because I wanted to be able to do that at a really broad level and work with organizations to leverage data. And I really believe that business intelligence will drive better results for service users. I know you probably just picked up that I did a little bit of PowerPoint karaoke there and read from the screen, but it's true. I also want a Harley quite badly. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, but anyway, I've got to focus on housing and homelessness, and I've been around, for 12 years, and so let's crack on to why you're here. You're not here to hear about me. I love talking about me. It's one of my favorite conversations. Ask my wife. But we're here to talk about data foundations. So let's push on. What we're going to be focusing on today is a little bit of an overview of data and also talking about some of the barriers in the community and social sector in using and leveraging data before we move on to the focus of today's webinar, which is what are data foundations and what can we do? And I'm a very practical man, I like to think anyway. And those three areas that we're looking at, understand, organize, and explore, you're actually going to be provided some practical tips on what you can do to start your organization's data journey. Before we move on to some more basic tips and tricks on how to really build that foundation in your own organization, and then I'm going to introduce you to what we like to call a data capability assessment. Which we'll talk about later. So that's what we're going through today. We're starting off with why we're here. And I don't know about you guys, but data is everywhere at the moment. I mean, when I put this slide together, that was before Cambridge Analytica happened with Facebook. And I felt like for the last couple of years now, it's just data is everywhere. It seems to me that there was a few of us 5-6 years ago who kind of understood that data was the role of data in organizations in the community and social sector and just everywhere. But now it sort of feels like the rest of the world is catching up, and we've got these new laws that have come in, the mandatory breach notifications, and also too cybersecurity is just becoming such a thing, and it's really, really cool. I'm glad to see this rise in data because what we're actually starting to see is, so there's this really massive amount of information that we can use to enhance our outcomes, but it also means there's a broader maturity going across the sector. Why is very interesting to me. Like this rise of data is due to greater interconnectedness. And we've got disparate systems now that have not historically spoken well to each other that are now speaking well to each other thanks to the rise of cloud-based platforms. The other thing we're seeing is a sense of greater competition. I mean, where we see that play out most prominently is in the corporate world. But for our purposes as community service professionals, I think what I'm seeing is there's greater competition for philanthropic funding. I think there's greater demand from public services to be able to demonstrate what the impact is of the funding that's being provided to them as well. So there's more of a focus from those government funders of saying, okay, great, here's your cash, and here's your pool of funding. What are you doing with it? What's the end result? What's the impact it's having? And you know, if I think back 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon for organisations to be able to have a picture related to their service delivery. So if you're in the disability space, or if you're in the housing space, you might have a picture of a family in front of a home saying, because of this organisation, we now have a home. That was really commonplace. You still see that now, but what we're starting to see a lot more of is embedded graphs about impact. Because of this organisation, we have a home, but this organisation has also worked with thousands of people. Well, this organisation has also provided these other services, which has provided a much greater or a holistic approach to working with people. So there is a greater demand from funders about demonstrating empirically what the work is that we're doing. There's a lot more data sources available than I can ever remember. Thanks to the rise of the open data initiatives over the last 4 to 5 years, data.vic.gov.au, data.gov.au as well. I mean, that's amazing stuff. I really encourage anybody who's interested in complementing their internal data sets with some external data sets to go and check out those places. And if people haven't heard of it, hit me up with a message and I'll send you a link of where to go. Like they're amazing. And there's also a whole bunch of other new tools to help us manage and visualize data: Tableau, Power BI, D3JS, you name it. Like, whereas once upon a time we were we had Excel and we had pivot tables and things were very static on flat files, we can now connect with APIs into very, very mature, dynamic business intelligence tools, which I talk about in other sessions. But really, one of the other things is just there's a volume of data that actually has always kind of been there, but there's this volume of data that we can now access quite easily. The systems are now being configured that most users, given a little bit of training, can actually use them. And as a result, with this upskilling piece and this maturing of systems to be a lot more compatible to your end user, we're seeing a greater variety of data being available to service users to help them make decisions. Speaking of systems too, we're seeing a lot more integration between our systems. They're talking a lot more easier to us. We don't need to worry about having some super tech person to be able to have do data linkages and system linkages, that sort of stuff. Thanks to cloud, is happening a lot easier. And there's also a whole bunch of new analysis that's coming through thanks to computer coding, R, and all these wonderful things. So it's really awesome. It's a very exciting time, and I feel like I'm riding the wave of data, and I'm loving it. And I think that if you're here now, I think you're very interested in this space too. And what I always remember is that so this feels all new and data feels new, and what I think though is that using empirical evidence for decision making isn't new. We've been doing it for a long time. But what is new is the volume of data and how we can access it and the tools that are able to bring it to life. So that's something to always remember. So whilst it feels very new, it's not. But we're acclimatizing to this new data space for the sector, which is really exciting. But there are some barriers that exist for us that don't exist for some other sectors. And it's really important to know about these because then we can identify them early on and actually start to address them before we go down our data paths. I should have said earlier on too that Tanya, I'm really open for questions at any time. So please don't hesitate to jump in. I'm open to being interrupted, and so please feel free to interrupt at any stage if you've got any questions. But what are those barriers? What a surprise, 62% lack of funding or access to resources. This was a really great piece of work done by the Centre for Social Impact in WA. And it's not a surprise. I think it's important that there's a comment up there about perception of barriers to outcome measurement. I think that's a really important comment that we need to consider. But yeah, 62% of those who are engaged for this survey said lack of funding or access to resources. I would challenge that a little bit, but that's another conversation for another day. The area that I really want to focus on is on that right-hand corner, the lack of established methodologies or tools. I think that is super important. What I see as underneath that actually is this established methodologies or tools. I see that as data culture. I see that as having a data culture within your organization, because a data culture will inform systems development. A data culture will inform a different mindset within your organization, where people will go, oh, actually, I don't see that doing my reporting every week where I have to fill in my boxes and my time, wherever it might be, as a chore. I see this is actually something that I can do for the organization to make sure that our service users are getting the most out of me as they can. But yeah, I think that's, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So yeah, we all know about funding and access to resources. That's not an uncommon discussion to have in our sector, and I think it's always going to be there. But this data culture is something that I'd like everybody to kind of keep in the back of their mind. One of the other challenges is data analytic professionals are now in high demand. I think they always have been, but now even more so than ever. Data science has been identified as one of the most growing professional areas over the next 10 years. And I would say that one of the other big challenges that came out from this work is that gaining the support of an enlisting staff for outcome measurement was identified as a barrier for 66% of respondents. That was a bit of PowerPoint karaoke from me. I read that off a script, but I think it's an important one. And this goes back to that piece about a data culture. So what they're trying to explain there is actually one of our biggest barriers is with our crew. You know, it's actually changing work behavior, work patterns, ways of working, demonstrating how data can actually be of value to your organization. And I think that is a big cultural piece that we'll always need to consider in terms of managing change within orgs. This is also a terrific graph that describes some of the other barriers that community services also experience. Now, whilst this is not specific to the NFP sector, there are actually a lot of learnings that we can grab it. So this was done by McKinsey, who I'm sure most of you have heard of, and they were talking about the rise of data and culture and data and how organizations can actually navigate these big shifts that are happening across all industries at the moment. And the big pieces that I ripped out of this, because I think they lead across to the community sector as well, is the importance of actually having an org structure that does recognise the importance of having a dedicated IT or analyst resource. For a long time, and you know, many of my roles actually had this, the idea of having data analysis or dedicated IT support for data-related products, not just tech troubleshooting, was kind of wrapped up in another, in another role. So you could be a community development worker with 0.2 of your role being data analyst. Pardon me. Whilst that's good, I think now you can't really get away with that much more. If you really want to use data to demonstrate the impact of your services, if you want to use data to identify new markets or new ways of service delivery, or if you want to use data to support you in larger strategic initiatives like mergers or whatever it might be, you can't just expect that a community development worker or an IT professional who isn't a trained data analyst will be able to just wrap that in their role. It's not really, it's no longer can you just be somebody who's good with Excel. You need to know you need to be able to identify somebody who can link the numbers using APIs and Excel and CSV files, XMLs, whatever it is, but also this person who can read the numbers too. So link and read. And I think they're actually two very different skill sets that need to be identified. The other key piece too is ensuring senior management involvement, getting buy-in from the most important or instill a culture of change. This is a big one. I just realized, I think I say that for most things, this is a big one or this is a key piece, but I really do. I think it's hard to scale any of these different elements. So imagine if your senior managers aren't invested in your data culture and they're managing your resources. That sort of approach does get flow-on effect. And if you haven't got a senior management team that are saying we need to really leverage our best asset, which is data, it's quite, it's not, you don't have to be a rocket surgery, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to rocket surgery, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to think, well, if my senior management aren't invested in this data culture, then neither will I. And ensuring that you've got the right data architecture and tech infrastructure as well. I know from our work in the NFP space that these are themes that we see time and time again across all different sectors and across all different states and territories as well. Like this is not stuff that is individual to one organisation. These sorts of cultural change issues and these sorts of legacy issues that have led to this sort of data culture that we're experiencing at the moment is really common. But okay, so that's the scene, that's the setting. But let's bounce to data foundations. This says it all. I wish I could have said I coined it, but it's from Price Waterhouse. Good data in, great insights out. I think that really kind of says it all. Becoming data-driven starts by getting your house in order. To benefit from data, you'll need a strong data foundation. Now that data is no longer a nice to have, organisations must begin to prioritise data management strategies to ensure they remain competitive, as we've said. The why of doing that is centrally, we use data to make key decisions. If you're going to be a data-driven organisation and you're going to use empirical evidence to make key decisions, it is absolutely central to ensure that your data quality is key. Because if your data quality is not so great, then it is likely that your insights will be not so great. Very similar, you can have a wonderful top-of-the-line Mercedes CLK with everything, but if you're putting not great petrol into it, the engine won't work very well. I think I'm going to use lots of car analogies because I certainly enjoy my cars. But what we're going to do is step one, we're going to understand your data. Step two, organize your data. Step three, explore your data, which I think is probably one of the funnest parts because you get to make pictures. But if you don't do step one and step two, step three, again, you're only going to get okay insights out instead of great insights out. Okay, so number one, understand your data. I'm just going to skip back a slide if you don't mind. So understanding your data, really what that means is, what do you have? Step one really includes getting an understanding of what's going on in your environment. What do you have? What data are you using? Are you using SharePoint? Are you using a CRM? What data are you collecting? Are you collecting data on your clients? Are you collecting data on your staff? Are you collecting data on all sorts of stuff? This is what you need to start to get your head around. There's so many different information sources that you might not even consider. You need to get a really holistic picture of where everything is and where it actually fits into your service delivery. The other thing, though, just as importantly, so once you've done that and you've kind of worked out what it is that you have, you might also start thinking, what do you need? So going back to legacy systems and going back to kind of repeating the same behaviors, if we keep making decisions based on the data that we're collecting, it is likely that we'll continue to do the same things. That's not a bad thing. I don't want to at all infer that that's necessarily a bad thing. A lot of organizations, most organizations, are doing a whole bunch of great stuff. We want to see that continue. But if you are interested in doing things a little bit differently, or if you are interested in service improvement or new areas of service delivery, or if you are interested in maybe just service enhancement, whatever it might be, you also need to ask the question, what do you need? You know, what other data are we not collecting to qualify the assumptions that we have internally about our service provision? Okay, so that's a really important point. So yeah, understand what you have, where's it all going, but also what do you need? Now, a great way of doing this is by actually doing a little bit of information architecture. And what is information architecture? Thank you for asking. It is from Dataversity. Information is any collection of data that is processed, analyzed, interpreted, organized, classified, or communicated in order to serve a useful purpose, present facts, or represent knowledge in any medium or form. Okay, obviously I read that from the script. This includes presentation, electronic, digital, print, audio, video, image, blah, yada, yada, yada. But basically what they're saying is any sort of information that is moving in and out of your organization can be considered information architecture, okay? And also working out what those information flows are, where does it sit, where does it come in, where does it go out, all that sort of stuff. And you know, the real key question for that is, you know, what does it actually look like for you? And there's also another key piece to this is that, so if information architecture is everything to do with information flows and information systems in your organization, where does information architecture end and data architecture actually begin? Well, I'm glad that you asked. So data architecture is a little bit of a subsection of information architecture in which that it's concerned with the design and use of data in structured formats such as databases and file systems. A data architecture model, a data architect models the data in stages, in conceptual, logical, and physical, and identifies the relationships between each data in each process that consumes and uses the data. Wow, that's from Dharma. So the best way that I really understand that is it's data in context. What does that mean? When we are trying to understand how we use data in one of our areas of service delivery, that data is in context. So if we're collecting data on our clients, the question is why? So if we're getting all this demographic data, then we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And the why of it is to actually start working out in what demographics are we having impact. So we can start asking ourselves, okay, we provide these services and we've seen a trend in different demographics utilizing our services. Why is that? The context of that data environment is the relationship between those two data sets and between those two sets of variables. Why is it that this cohort is using our service? Why is it that this cohort seems to have great outcomes with our service? Then you can start adding in more relationships. You know, we can see a prevalence of service users having great outcomes with our service because we have this cohort of staff. You know, an example of that that comes to mind is when you've got a really effective service delivery arm, they might have some ability to engage a certain client group really, really well. And with your data architecture, you can actually start mapping these relationships. So again, this is all very high level, but here's a practical way in which you can start doing that. A class diagram or a relational mapping exercise is actually a really great way of visualizing what's going on in your organization. The purpose of a diagram such as this is to depict the relationships amongst your critical data entities or within your enterprise. So remember too, I said data in context. Think of data entities as data in context. So we've got in the top right-hand corner, what is our client information? And down in our right corner, what services are they using? The diagrams such as this are developed to clearly present these relationships and to help understand the lower level data models of your enterprise. So I wonder what this might look like for you. Another example that I think of is if we have a look in the alcohol and other drug space, why we've got, again, certain clients are coming with certain demographics. Let's say that they're having issues in relation to ice misuse and ice abuse. Why is it that this organization has some really great outcomes with that cohort? And it might actually start linking up to some of the different ways in which they engage their service users, or the different sorts of living life skills, or the different sorts of intervention programs that they're using, as opposed to some of the other AOD providers out there. Now, what I start to see now from a management perspective is what you've done there is you've actually identified an area of competitive advantage. So doing this exercise has given you the ability to identify your demographics, which we've been able to do for some time. B, the prevalence of that demographic using certain areas of your service delivery. But then when we start actually thinking, we're measuring what the impact is on that service delivery, we can start saying why. Is this something that's inherent to our organization that we're actually doing really well? Cool, we need to showcase this. And why don't we go off and start looking at philanthropic partnerships to really say, we have some real success in tackling issues of ice addiction in our community, or something similar to that. Similarly, we might also start using an exercise like this to start working out where we need to lift our game. So we might see that we've got this demographic that we're funded to provide a service to. They are linked to this area of service provision, but we're noticing that we're actually having a high turnover rate, or we're not having a low success program completion success rate, or whatever you might want to call it in your own organization. We start asking ourselves why. Now, if the smart data manager out there would start saying, we actually need to start querying those people, those service users who are leaving the program, and asking them why. So that's the data of what you don't have. From that, you might find that there's some gaps in your service delivery that might need to be amended, or you might need to start reviewing some of your program methodology that you're using. Okay, so this is a mapping relationship exercise is a great way to start just seeing those sort of flow-on effects, or those questions you might have to ask about your datas, your questions you might have about your service delivery, but also seeing the interconnection between all the different data sets and information flows within the organization. Now, another way of kind of working out what you have and what you might need as well is by doing some basic data mapping exercises as well. So what we can see here over in the left-hand corner is it's actually very common. So we're seeing a whole bunch of disparate systems and information sources. So you've got a file server, you might have a finance system or an admin system like MIOB or Braintree or whatever it might be. You might have a dedicated content management system or some sort of client relationship management system. And sitting under that, you'll have a whole bunch of different data sets. And then you've got these wonderful, wonderful tools like SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive, that you've got a wealth of information in that have been growing steadily over time. But what we see there in that middle section is we've got a whole bunch of different disparate data sources that actually aren't talking to each other. So it would be very difficult to actually start mapping the relationship between them. Then when we actually start trying to get any sort of insight from them, what we're realizing is it's a very labor-intensive job to get the extract from that system or get an extract from the Access database or whatever it might be, or get some Word documentation that's got a table embedded in it in your SharePoint or OneDrive. And then after you've done that, you have to make a graph. Then you get all those graphs, and then you cut and paste them and put them onto a report that goes to your board. That's a day's work. It's nearly a day's work just talking about it. But this is really, really normal. We see a lot of this where we've got multiple data storages, multiple data locations, multiple data types. Now, don't forget, different data types don't tend to speak to each other all that well. And also multiple data tools used for BI. So one person in your team might be really, really great at using Excel and pivot tables, and you've got some terrific graphs that are coming from them on one area of your service provision only. But you might find that you've got an old social scientist like me who grew up with SPSS and is able to wrap some stuff up in that. And another area or another program is using SPSS. So you've got these different tools being used for BI, and it's really hard to use this information and think of it in terms of rigor, because you're still not sure about the data that's going into it, and you're not sure because the numbers don't look alike, they don't look the same. So we default to anecdotal information that we're getting from our frontline staff. That there's a really, really common story that I hear a lot of the time. So again, what we can do is a little bit of data mapping, and what we see here is what we often experience in the social sector. But what you can do is start thinking about what you want your future state to look like as well. Now, this is something that I get very excited about. So the first thing to do is actually start reducing the amount of information sources that you have. Okay, so if we look at information sources on our left, we've got a whole bunch of disparate systems, as we said. But what we've actually done, and this is a real key piece, is we've actually limited the amount of systems now that we're using to manage our information flows within our organization. So we might have one great content management system or ERP that is managing our CRM and our finance data or project related data. And then we have one dedicated intranet, which we might use for all our other org performance data, client stats, you name it, and marketing and comms as well. Now, where it starts getting super exciting is how we can actually extract that data and then wrap it up in a new visualization tool such as Power BI. You probably hear over this session and other sessions, I talk a lot about Microsoft products. It's because I'm aware from our own work that 88% or a significant proportion of our sector uses Microsoft, which is great. It's a terrific product. They're terrific systems, and they're very supportive of the NFP environment. So I believe of working with the systems that our crew are working with. So Power BI, for those who don't know, is a business intelligence tool. Well, I'll show you some pretty pictures later on where you can mash up and visualize a whole bunch of disparate data sources. It is super cool. Power BI can get insights from a whole bunch of different systems using extracts. They can also use API gateways, which means you're querying data in real time. And it also works with a whole bunch of really super great intranets. So if you've got a really strong SharePoint environment, you've got a lot of workflows or forms built into that, Power BI can query that directly, which means you don't have to worry about doing an extract, dumping it somewhere, doing some manual data entry. It's just one alignment. Power, you've got some insights at the ready, and yeah, it's really, really exciting. So the practical tip that I'd like you to take away from this is not a complex tool, this data mapping exercise. It's really just working out where everything is and how you're getting your insights now. But then also going, okay, where do we want to be? What's our future state? What do we have to start doing to get there? These slides were made available at the end of the day, and like I said, it's not super. It's not a super confusing exercise to do, but if you do need any help, please feel free to get in touch, and me and the crew can help you through that as well. All right, So that's a bit of a data mapping exercise. Going back, sorry. So that was, understanding your data is step one. The next thing we need to think about is how do you actually organize your data? So now we've worked out where everything is, what the relationships between everything are, and what we want to go to in the future. Now, if we go back to this piece right here, we might have noticed that we want to start limiting the amount of different systems we're using so we can consolidate our information sources. Now, why of the organize your data again is central. I believe in three core concepts when it comes to managing information. One, reduce the amount of systems that you're using. The more you can focus on data entry or data input, the more rigor you can put into those practices. One of the easiest ways to do that is a consolidation of your disparate systems. So if you've just got one system to rule them all, you can really work with your crew on ensuring that the data that you're putting into that, or the manual data entry, or however it is done as effectively as possible. The other thing too is looking at how you can centralize all these data sources as well. So instead of having them in a number of different places on a server somewhere, in a cloud somewhere else, or wherever it might be, look at how many you can actually move to we're agnostic in our approach. I think cloud's the way to go personally, but if you can look at doing most things in the cloud, do them. If you can look at leveraging, really strong 365 environment that have got a lot of these applications embedded, do it. Again, same with Google, the G Suite, or wherever it is. My point is, use one thing, use it as well as you can. Only bring in new applications and systems when you have to. And wherever possible, integrate your data as often as possible. Again, this always goes back to managing the rigor around the data that goes in. If you've got 7 different information points, entry points, then you're going to have to manage 7 different information inputs. And that's the biggest risk in data rigor is input, in my view. And I'm happy to have a conversation. So if you can reduce 7 input layers down to 3, then you can automatically see that if you're working with your crew to make sure that the data goes in is as appropriate as possible and has got as much rigor as possible, then you can automatically assume that the data coming out the other end is probably a lot more robust. So one of the ways that we do this is by system selection. I've been doing a few of these over the last couple of years, and geez, it's a tough one. I think I took it for granted. But before I got into this game, the data game and system game and all that, I think I took it for granted as a youth worker about how difficult it is to actually get the right system for your organisation, and the challenges that many IT managers go through in finding the right system to meet your organisational need. And they are so important. They're so important for one really key reason, and that is your systems are your gateway to your information. Like I said, good data in, great insights out. If you've got a average system which is only being used to 25% of its capacity by your crew, the insights you're getting out at the other end are questionable. So it's really important that we go through a rigorous approach to system selection to work out what it is that your organisation needs. Right here, I have some key steps which we'll go through. So one is identify your need. It's actually a 7-step process. Is working out, when we talk about need, is it a CRM? Is it an ERP? Is it a client management system? Ask yourself the question, what are the drivers that are making me choose this new system? What are the gripes? What are the challenges my crew are having at the moment in terms of recording data? When we go back to the identification of what data we need, I do have a really great client management system, but you're not collecting a whole bunch of information on your organizational performance. You might not have a really top shelf finance system in place or something like that. Equally, it could be the other way around. Like, you're getting all this great performance data through Greentree or MyOp or whatever it might be, but you're not really getting top information on what your clients are, or what your clients are up to, and what the impact of your services are. And I would say this is really common, but I think everything needs to work from the client backwards. So work it out. What is your need? What are your drivers for this? And speak to your peers, because they often know more about your needs sometimes, or more about what's out there than you do. I found it fascinating that every time I've reached out to my peers and said, "Hey, what have you done in this situation?" Or "I'm working with this crew right now. They're awesome. We're trying to work out what system's best for them." Actually, a housing management system comes to mind. I reach out to other housing management professionals, and I get this comment back, "Oh, what are you doing? Because we don't really know as well." Or, we use this terrific system. I'm not going to name any systems names here. We use this system, but we found it had the following issues. Or, we went and we've been investigating this system, and we think it can do this. Your peers are often your best source of information about the quality of the system itself, in terms of meeting, expectation, meeting need. So, like any vendor out there, they're going to state that the system can probably save, solve world hunger, but your peers will be able to tell you if the expectation of their system, once they put it in, actually met their need. And also, just as importantly too, is the quality of support from the providers and the system vendors themselves. This is a really, really important part. Is that there's no point having a system, embedding it, and then they just wipe their hands and walk away. I see any system selection as a partnership approach, because systems are always changing. The rate of change in this tech space is unimaginable some days, and they'll be bringing in new things to their system which you might want to be able to leverage. And if you don't have a partnership approach with your vendor, then you'll probably won't be using your system to its maximum potential. So speak to your peers, ask them about what their experience were with the providers, but also did it actually match what it needed for them to do. Then identify solutions, go to market, see what's out there. Don't forget that we're in an international market now. We've got a market that's a lot bigger than just Australia. Thanks to cloud-based systems, you can access support at any time, any day. Zendesk is amazing, as are a whole bunch of other ticket support systems. And you can look to overseas vendors for solutions as well. We're not locked by our borders anymore. Then obviously too, ask for a demonstration, get them out there, make them work for their money. I think this is a great one. I'm a really big believer in it's totally okay to make vendors prove that their system is right for you. I've seen on a couple of occasions when we're working with orgs and helping them on system selection that they might be a little bit timid in saying to a vendor, "Hey, we're not convinced yet. We actually need you to come out and take us through this." It's okay. These systems are a massive, massive cost, and they should be. They're worthwhile when they're working well. But make the vendors really kind of prove that they're right for your organization. Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to ask them again and again, "We need you to prove this. We need you to show us how this will work." And once you've done that, you can actually evaluate your needs and drivers. Is the cost worth it? Will this actually help you reposition your organization? Will this actually help you ensure that you're getting better outcomes for your clients? That needs to be central in all your decisions. And involve your stakeholders. I think this is I just realized how often I say this is a really important part. Okay, this is key to a successful systems rollout, is making sure that the system selection is done with all stakeholders in mind, from anybody who's going to use it or anybody who's going to have any exposure to it, they need to be involved in the choice of it. I'm going through a process at the moment where we're doing the implementation of a new system. And one of the things that we did, we actually set up a committee, and the committee was comprised of a representative of each team. And they get exposure to the systems, all the different systems. They're involved in the vetting and the evaluation of the systems, and they own it. And one of the reasons is they're going to be your champions. They're going to be your internal champions because they're going to feel like they chose the right system for them. And most importantly, though, just be ruthless. You know, it is totally okay to be ruthless in your choice. It is totally okay to take a little bit of time. It is totally okay to say no, because the truth of the matter is, whatever system you choose, you're going to have to live with it. It's probably one of the most common things that I hear out there is, we chose this system, we just needed to get something up and running. I've heard that time and time again. And what I'd like to do is challenge that a little bit. I think we can all live in Excel for long enough to make sure that we've got the right system up and running. We don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction, because it actually causes more drama later on down the track. So be ruthless, because you're going to be the one who has to live with this. So, you know, exploit, you know, so organize your data. Make sure you've got the right systems to meet your need. I just realized there's a massive typo in this slide. So we're going to exploit your data. So we're going to explore your data. My apologies. I didn't realize that that typo was there right there. So my apologies for that. I'll fix that later on. So this is step 3, and this is the one that we're all waiting for. Explore your data. And how do we do that? With pretty graphs. But before we go to the pretty graph section, what I want to make abundantly clear is that our pretty graphs and our BI tools and the insights we can get from them are only as good as the foundations that we've worked through before. So linking what we've just talked about in terms of doing some data mapping and relational exercises. So if you're still using 7 disparate systems and you're ripping out 6 or 7 different extracts to talk about 7 different areas of service provision, the quality of your insights are diminished. If you've identified your future state and what you would love your ideal systems environment to look like, you know, so a centralization of data sources so you can focus on data rigor and data input methodology, then the insights that you'll get will be a lot more robust. Just in the same fashion, if you've gone through a process of working out what data you have through that relational mapping exercise, started asking questions of what do you need, the pictures that you're going to start having now up here will be a lot more useful if you've identified, yep, we know what we have, but also what do we need? So these pictures are only as good as those questions you've asked way back in the piece, okay? Because you can wrap up and make a whole bunch of insights out of data sources that you already have, and you probably find out a few new things, but you won't find out some of that new stuff too, which we talked about earlier. And in terms of the system selection, if you've got the right systems in place that are working for your crew, these pictures here will have a lot more validity. And that means when they go to your board or when they go to your exec, you'll be able to say with a lot more confidence, look, we've ripped out the response, well, just using these here, our client demographics and our outcome measurement we're getting, we have got from our system that is centralized and consolidated. We feel quite confident that this is what we're hearing from our clients. So if you want to do a little bit more content, if you want to do some content marketing using tools like this, you can stand by your claims a lot more readily, instead of just using 7 or 8 different Excel spreadsheets that are open to 7 or 8 different prone to human error. So with all that in mind, once you've got all those foundations laid, you can now start exploring using some business intelligence tools like Power BI or Tableau, D3JS. I recommend Power BI like I said before, not because I think it's any better. I think it's a great tool. I think it's just as good. We use it a lot down here. I think it's just as good as Tableau and the rest of them. I think it's got some strengths that others don't have, but the biggest strength to me is Microsoft tends to work well with Microsoft, and we know that a vast proportion of the not-for-profit sector use Microsoft products. So to avoid some of those issues, if you want to move along to a bit more of a mature data or data analytics and using APIs and querying data, Power BI can be a great tool to do this. Some of the strengths of it is that you can connect to a whole bunch of different data sources from CSV, APIs. You can directly query SharePoint or SharePoint intranet sites as well. And that means you don't have to worry about extracting data and then throwing it somewhere and then putting a graph. It's automatically querying data. It's amazing. You can use Power BI to drill down into different areas and actually get a whole bunch of insights on one page that can help make decisions that will inform your service delivery. So explore your data, chuck it up there. One thing that I absolutely love about doing this is you can qualify your assumptions internally. I love how culture of organizations kind of happens, and we start telling ourselves these internal stories, and these internal stories turn into legend, and these legends turned into how we actually manage our service provision. But when you've actually got data to challenge them and you say, is that actually the case? You can start seeing changes in your service delivery that actually help your service users as well. So that's the one thing I love about data, is that it doesn't lie. As long as you've got those foundations right, data is data, the insights are the insights. Well, I just realized that we are pushing on for time, and there's a couple of other things we need to go through. So some basic tips and tricks. Focus on data quality. So whether or not you've identified your future state and you're working towards that, great. But in the interim, you can actually work with your frontline crew and work on some developing data entry standards. Maybe get your team leaders to work with your case managers and embed it into their team meetings. How's it all going? Also to try to avoid duplication wherever you can. It's just wasted time. And also to what we start seeing, there's a lot of more margin for error. Use a visualization tool as well. So start having fun with it. There's no harm in getting Power BI. It's free too. I don't think I mentioned that before. Power BI, and there's also public versions of Tableau and others. Start playing around with them. The more you play around with them, the more you're going to feel confident using them later on. So start just playing around, having some fun. Challenge your assumptions as well. So start asking, what is it we tell ourselves internally? And is that right? Well, let's go and get some data and see if that's actually the case. And then we can open up this great conversation about, why do we do things the way we're doing? Can we change? And that goes to this idea of determining your story and evidence that, we've in the sector historically said, this is what we do and this is what we do really well. Cool, back it up with some evidence, back it up with some cool graphs. And more than anything, to start that idea of embracing a data culture. I love the idea of bringing your crew in for this journey too. So get them to start talking about, are the systems right for them? Get them talking about what stories do they want to hear about the service provision. I think there's something super strong about a management team giving monthly updates on what we're doing well and what we're not, using empirical evidence. And then you can reinforce the value of why we're collecting data in the first place. There's quite a few more, but feel free to grab the slide deck at the end of this session. And yeah, these are basic things you can do straight away. You don't have to wait for a new system. You don't have to wait to do some data mapping. You can do these after you leave today if you want. The last thing I want to focus on before we have to wrap up is, you might want to ask yourself, where are we in this in our data journey? And feel free to grab this, and we do this a lot with our clients. You can circle where it is that you think you are in your data journey as an organization, and you can then start to identify what areas need a little bit of work. So if you're not using data visualization tools, for example, You might say that you're starting out or a beginner and you want to move to an intermediate. The same too is data governance and planning. You might say, oh, we're actually the beginner, but we need to move to an advanced level, given our, we might be in a highly regulated or highly scrutinized environment. Why? Why are we doing all this? That's why. Improved insights, improved outcomes, improved efficiencies, improved management. I don't need to do much more PowerPoint karaoke, but those are the things that will come as a result of starting to lay these foundations and becoming data ready. And obviously down the bottom there, the key driver is improved access to funding. The more you can demonstrate the impact of your work, the better placed you are to go and seek out new forms of funding, go seek out new partnerships, go seek out new areas of service provision, all that sort of stuff. The last piece I'll leave you is from an organisation most of us would have heard of or worked with in our time, is ACOS. I'm just going to leave this here, and I think it really encapsulates, pardon me, why people are becoming data focused. Data to me, and I'll just speak for me, data, it can be the thing that can really drive improved service delivery for our clients and the people why we're in this game and to begin with. If we know where our areas of strength are, we can leverage these. If we know where our gaps in our service delivery are, we can work on these. This is the reason why we're doing these sorts of things. And then when we get to that level of maturity, we can actually work a lot more effectively together to drive those outcomes, So I'll just leave that there. And yeah, last thing from me is to please get in touch. If you've got any questions about the session today, or if you just, if you're like, hey, I don't really know where to begin, get in touch, give us a call. We do this a lot, and we thoroughly enjoy our work. I hope that's come across in our, in my presentation today. I work with this super cool team, and we've all got quite a long history in the sector, and we all believe in technology for social justice. So please feel free to get in touch. My number's down at the bottom. You can do a Google search, and I'm around, and so are my team. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Unless there's any questions, Tanya, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. We haven't got any questions at this point. We did have somebody ask you for the links, but I'll send you those details after the webinar. So thank you so much for presenting, Sam, and for everyone joining us today. Thank you. I hope you have all learned a lot from the presentation and that all your questions have been answered. If you have any questions that come to mind later or any feedback at all about the webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we'll answer those questions offline. As Sam has said, you can also contact him directly with via the details on the slide deck. And don't forget, the recording will be available within the next week and a link will be sent to you with the slides as well. So keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you everyone for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks.